they're going cashless. They just do not accept cash.
But a growing number of businesses will not even accept cash anymore.
The cashless society is rapidly happening.
And it certainly won't mean that our money tap gets turned off at any moment if you ever say anything that people don't agree with.
Hello and welcome to The Nexus. Are we moving towards cash extinction? It certainly looks like notes and coins may soon be as dead as a dodo, as more and more banks try to terminate cash. In the past few days, a major UK bank put new limits on cash deposits and withdrawals. And it's not just here in Britain. You're seeing pressure to kill cash in many countries around the world in lots of different ways. Now, some banking boffins say going cashless will be good for society. Others say if we lose cash, we'll end up losing our freedom.
Money may all day.
Nobody flashes the cash like Floyd Money Mayweather.
You know, right here, a light million.
The boxing legend is a big believer that cash is king, and it's been that way for centuries. But look at it now.
I'm going to buy some strawberries, and I'm offering exactly the right amount of money here on the help desk. So you people take that money, £1.90, and I will take my strawberries outside. If you want to call the police, call the police. I pay by legal tender.
Rejected by retailers, reports of cash's demise are growing by the day.
New research from Link, the cash machine people, published in the Daily Mail, shows that more than half of the public have had their cash rejected by retailers or been discouraged from using it.
Retailers rejecting cash, it's like water flowing uphill. It's just not natural. Some libertarian types believe the fix is in.
Going cashless is a way for the government to police people's views through money.
Of course, that would mean that it could facilitate social credit scores. It would mean that the government, like in the trucker protests in Canada, will be able to shut down your bank accounts. There's been claims in the UK that people have had their bank accounts shut down or controlled.
Indeed, bank accounts have been shut down in the UK. It seems that businesses dealing in just cash are going out of fashion. The latest squeeze on cash came from the UK's NatWest Bank, which plans to limit the amount of money that you can deposit and withdraw from its cash machines. Up until now, customers could drop off about $3,800 per day, but that will be reduced come September by about 75% to just $954. NatWest says the move is to make it more difficult for criminals to use cash to fund illegal activities. Not everyone is convinced.
NatWest will be limiting cash that you can deposit and cash that you can take out. And they keep the absolute right to refuse cash. They even keep the right to refuse checks. Basically, they want everything to be electronic.
And this is happening not just in the UK. The attempts to reduce the use of cash is global. In Nigeria, the media is showing people struggling to get cash to pay for goods, as the government tries to take larger notes out of circulation, ostensibly to combat money laundering.
Queues outside petrol stations and outside banks. Residents of Lagos wait for hours to get cash or fuel, but neither are guaranteed.
India went through something similar and is now leading the way for people to live in a cashless society.
Almost half of the world's digital payments were made in India alone last year.
The Unified Payments Interface, created by India's National Payments Corporation, enables cashless interbank transactions via mobile devices.
The Unified Payments Interface, or UPI, is on a trajectory to achieve an astonishing milestone of 1 billion transactions per day by 2026-27.
Meanwhile, tech giants like Amazon are racing towards cashless payments as they roll out their Palm payment system, which lets you register the palm of your hand to a bank card. It's also being introduced in their 500-plus Whole Foods stores.
Amazon says that the Pay by Palm technology will be at all of those stores nationwide by the end of the year. Customers just have to hover their hand over the device to pay.
A cashless society may seem the way forward, but experts warn it could freeze out the elderly and those with low income or debt.
The fear is that this will be used to grant control that will then be used injudiciously against you.
And millions of local businesses rely on cash from their customers.
And there's loads that always use cash. They won't use anything else.
But in the future, maybe they'll have no choice, as the Federal Reserve is trialling a central bank digital currency, or CBDC for short.
the Federal Reserve is considering a digital dollar.
Everybody's talking about CBDC, central bank digital currency.
A CBDC is basically a cryptocurrency regulated and owned by the government. And a lot of countries are looking closely at the idea.
Today, 114 countries are exploring CBDC, equal to 95% of the global GDP.
A cashless world may sound convenient, but critics warn people's privacy would be up for grabs to the highest corporate bidder.
I don't want you to know where I'm spending my money, and you mind your own business.
Well, he may not want people to know what he's buying, but are his concerns shared by the average man and woman on the street? We sent our producers out of the office to find out.
Hi there, sir. Do you think governments and banks are trying to kill off cash?
Why not? Let cash die, I say.
Everyone's killing off cash. Football I go to football every week. Can't take cash. Some pubs don't take cash. Yeah, because most of loads of people, they want credit cards all the time. They don't want cash.
We need cash in everything that we do. I think we've seen the push since the pandemic on going cashless. There was a guise of how they pushed it in. They've been trying to do it for years on getting ID cards.
I think it's all a program. It's all total manipulation, so they can count and know precisely what you got, what you're doing with it. Cash is king.
They're killing cash because one still can maintain and hold on to power if they have money, if you're cancelled. Whereas if you're cancelled and you don't have cash, then, you can't do anything. You're at mercy to the powers that be.
They say cash is king, it ain't no more. We take cash here, but it's all credit card mostly.
What do you make of the banks that say that they're going to limit how much you can withdraw from your own money?
It's control, isn't it? That's my money. Why do you want to limit it?
Are we heading towards a cashless society?
No, I don't think so.
What are your main concerns when it comes to a cashless society?
Well, obviously, giving cash to people on the streets, you can't do that so much anymore. Like I said, the loss of freedom of being able to actually just go out and be able to spend money on stuff and not be tracked by the banks, the governments, whatever.
How does going cashless affect you?
At the moment, it doesn't affect my line of work, but it's going to affect our lives, private lives, ain't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. You pay for cash, that's paying for the bank. You pay on the card, that's paying for bankers, ain't it?
Yeah.
It's making the banks get richer.
So when's the last time you used cash?
This morning. I go out of my way to use cash, just to keep it going. And if I go into a shop and they don't take cash, I walk out.
Okay, let's bring in our guest now. And today we have Lynette Zang. She's been a banker and a stockbroker, and for more than 20 years, the chief market analyst at ITM Trading. David Morgan also has many years' experience in the city and helps wealthy clients become even wealthier. And finally, we have Patrick Boyle, who is a professor of finance, and he somehow finds the time to make brilliant YouTube videos that have helped educate millions of people around the world. Welcome to all of you onto the Nexus today. Much appreciated. David, if I may start with you, you said something that's quite alarming. You said, once you have a cashless society, the government or central bank has complete control. What do you mean by that?
Well, we're moving into central bank digital currency where there is no cash. And to have a bank account, you basically give all your information to the central bank, and they can do what's done in China already, which is called a social credit score. And you're able to buy or sell based upon what they like you doing or not doing. So in other words, if you're not in line with the propaganda press, you may not be able to buy something that you have the money for, but you're docked from doing it because they have the control. If I could just go a step further, I'd like to point out it's not going to be that easy, because the Asia Pacific region uses 16% of all sales is in cash. Vietnam, 53% is in cash. Indonesia, over 50% is in cash. And in Thailand, 64% uses cash. So a lot of these Asian countries already use a lot of cash instead of a debit card or, let's say, electronic payment system. Go to Latin America, it's about 28%. North America, it's about 11%. So there's a lot of cash being used still. And this is going to be more difficult to overcome, I believe, than the bankers are putting in their thought process.
Well, let's say they can overcome it in due course. What's the worst thing that can happen?
Well, loss of freedom. I mean, basically, if you cannot, it doesn't really matter how much money you have. I made a video some time ago called About Freedom. And I said, no matter how much money you have, real or fake, if you can't say what you want to say, go where you want to go, buy what you want to buy, then what good is all that money going to do you? In other words, if you've lost your freedom, you've basically lost everything. From my point of view, freedom is priceless, and that's what we're up against. So, again, to come back to the other point, there's 1.7 billion people on the planet that are unbanked. These are people that have no bank account whatsoever at all, which means it's going to be a little bit more difficult, again, for the bankers to get their way, let's say.
What makes you think that governments and central banks have any such thoughts in their head that they want to use that control? Okay, Lynette, come in. I'm being naive. I'm being naive on purpose, Lynette. Come in.
Okay. Well, there are a couple things.
Yeah.
Number one, probably one of my very favorite pieces that the IMF ever did was the 2015 Breaking Below the Lower Zero Bound, where they actually laid out exactly how they would get people to volunteer their cash. Because what we know for sure, they say it in almost everything they write, is that central banks like a distance between their policy and how it is presented to you. So what they were talking about doing was charging negative rates, but putting a chip in the currency. So not taking the currency away, right? However, if you go in to buy, say, a cup of coffee and you want to use cash, it costs you $6. If you use your electronic payment, any form of electronic payment, it costs $5. So in that way, you would automatically say, well, I'd rather pay 5 than 6, so I'm going to use the electronic payment and start to whittle away and get rid of even more cash. But this has been a movement that's been going on really since the 20s and then the 50s with the credit cards. So these things happen slowly, but I absolutely agree with David that it is not going to be as easy as they want us to think it is. And I don't think that it's inevitable either, because we vote with our wallets and our purses. And I vote for physical.
Are you saying that the banks will give you negative interest rates in order to spur spending? In other words, you'll say to yourself, well, what's the point of me paying the bank to hold my money when I should just spend it?
Oh, absolutely. But look, we're in a consumer-driven world anymore, right? So they've got to get the consumer to consume. And certainly, if you're watching your principal erode without you actually buying anything, then what are you most likely to do? Yeah, you're most likely to put it into anything that's going to hold its value better than the cash that you're watching go away.
So, Patrick, let's assume that a cashless society does happen. We can talk about the possibility of it happening in a minute. But first of all, it does happen. These two are arguing that you cannot trust the central bank or the government to have your best interest at heart.
You know, it's an interesting thing because most of our big purchases are already electronic. Like any large purchase you buy, like even stuff bought on Amazon, you know, there's not a huge amount of privacy around large purchases. Around small purchases, there still is, but as it was pointed out, in the United States, only 11% of spending is in cash. And that's not really driven by, I don't believe, by a push from government. I feel it's convenience. Interestingly, I've noticed the opposite of what was said, which is that a lot of gas or petrol stations in the United States offer you a discount for paying in cash rather than using your credit card because the gas station avoids the fees. But of course, the problem is that people don't carry enough cash around with themselves to really pay for petrol in cash anymore. You know, I do think the ability to pay with cash is an important thing for privacy. I think it's also important for the less well-off in society who it's not reasonable to expect to have sort of a mobile phone or even a banking relationship. You know, a lot of, you know, there's a good percentage of the world that don't have banks, and therefore, you know, it's going to be a struggle to pull. And also their accounts are so small that banks would rather not have them as customers because it costs more to have them as customers that could be generated as fees. You know, I don't really think there's a grand conspiracy to get rid of cash so we can all be tracked. Yeah. But I think there is an erosion of the use of cash, and I think its existence is important.
Patrick, David was warning that if we give, you know, if we become a cashless society, then governments around the world, including the UK and the United States, will end up emulating the Chinese social credit system. Okay, so that's his great fear. And Lynette's great fear that she mentioned was that the banks could actually force you to spend your money to prop up the economy by charging you negative interest rates. Could you just address those two fears and tell me if you hold the same fears?
You know, I think David's comment is sort of reasonable. If you look at any human history, there is, there is a history of governments, even in, what might at first seem reasonable societies, reaching for extra control. You look in Canada with the truckers having their accounts shut off and so on. And Canada 10 years ago would have been put forth as, one of the safer, more reasonable countries. So these things do happen. I forget, what was Lynette's question?
Lynette was concerned that in order to stimulate the economy, the banks will actually charge you negative interest rates until you spend your money.
Well, they already do this because, the majority of people don't, even in countries where there were negative interest rates, people aren't really stacking up physical currency under their beds. They kind of choke down the negative interest rate, or they do spend their money. And that's sort of how central bank policy works, is they hike and lower interest rates in order to encourage
That's a good point.
behaviors that they
want. Let me put that to Lynette. So what changes, Lynette, if we become a cashless society?
Well, a lot changes. First of all, I would like to make note that all things are put together as convenient. And it is certainly a whole lot more convenient to carry paper around than it is to carry this. But it's not actually, it is a concern and a fear, but it's actually what they said in their documentation, meaning the IMF, which is all the central bankers. They brought up two key pieces for going to CBDCs and cashless. Number one, for governments, they can do lifetime taxes. And of course, it's certainly easy to pull the money out of the account and do those kinds of things if everything is held in one place. And the central banks are trying to tell us that negative rates are a choice. Although I have to tell you, the only one that I would want to lend money to and get back less than I loaned them would be my children. I'm certainly not going to do that for a government or a corporation because that makes no sense to me. So, the central banks, they say that once we have the CBDCs, then there are no limits to how low they can push interest rates and to inspire you to spend.
David, let's talk about CBDCs. Now, not everyone will be familiar with that, but the central bank digital currency. Can you just tell us what that is and how likely is it we will see the introduction of the CBDCs around the world?
Well, as you said, it's a digital-only system that's run at one central authority, basically. It could be multiple central banks at first, but the IMF has already indicated they wanted, complete control eventually. If you look at China, they have it installed. It's 400 million people in China that don't use cash at all. They use WeChat or Tencent to make all purchases. All purchases come off their phone. And that's where the authorities are looking to go. Because, as I said, 1.7 billion people are unbanked, which are almost 20% of the population worldwide, but 93% of the world's population on a cell phone. So once you put everything digitally on a phone, almost everybody could come in the system. And it's already being done. Let's say, maybe unless you're at the level of, studying this stuff daily like me, Lynette, and Patrick, but World Coin has already been introduced. That's where you have the silver orb and people looked into it and got an iris scan. And this is a precursor to a universal basic income, in my strong opinion. But it's just basically a control and tax situation. I mean, if you want to call it advantages, when you make a point of sale, they'll just tax you right then. You don't need to fill out an IRS form in the US. It's automatic. But again, they have control over your money. So that's the point. It's a loss of freedom. There's a direct correlation between honest money and a freedom to the people.
Patrick, what are the chances, or rather, when will it be introduced by the Fed, the Bank of England, the ECB, the central bank digital currencies? When do you think they'll be introduced?
I don't think there's a real urge to introduce these things. I think there was this growth of a few years ago, the huge popularity of crypto and things like that, and the central banks thought, oh, we should appear modern, we should, speed up settlement and things like that. And so they announced these programs. I don't think there's any real urge. Like, for the longest time, you could have argued, why keep your money at a bank rather than keeping it at the central bank? And the answer is just that the central bank didn't want to administer that. And there is even an argument that if you move money to the central bank away from regular banks, you move in a direction of at least private banks not being bailed out constantly after losing money. But I don't really think there's a huge conspiracy to do any of this stuff. I really think even the talk of central bank digital currencies was just tied to central bankers trying to be trendy when, when people were excited about digital
I think
currencies.
Lynette needs to come in before she bursts. Come in, Lynette.
Thank you so much. There are a couple of things. Number one, the 1996 NSA white paper on how to create a mint basically laid out how you create a cryptocurrency. That's one thing. Then, on top of that, personally, I could be wrong, but I don't think that it was a coincidence that Bitcoin was born in January of 2009 and quantitative easing in the US was born in March of 2009. And typically, I've been studying currencies and currency life cycles since 1987, and there are repeatable patterns. And one of those repeatable patterns is that when you want somebody to buy into a new system, you let them make a lot of, or make it appear that they're making a lot of fiat money, which is exactly what happened in the crypto space. And at the point, the last time that I checked, so it could be more now, but the last time I checked, they had 16% of the US adult population that on some level had participated in cryptocurrencies. That is a level for adoption. And when you read some things from like Karsten's at the Bank for International Settlements and how he talks about how people will go to the grocery store and it would all seem just like everything is normal, which is what the goal is, to make that transition. But it only appears normal to the purchaser. In reality, absolutely everything is tracked, and therefore everything can be controlled. And to David's point, taxed at that moment. And so,
But what's the link what is the link with quantitative?
Like, taxing, frankly, is just annoying anyhow, because they ask you to fill out a form giving them information they already have. Like, I can never understand why Americans spend 3 days a year wasted filling out a stupid form when the government writes back and says you made a mistake on the form because they already have the information.
Exactly. Just quickly, Lynette, what was the link you were making between crypto and quantitative easing? What should we understand from that?
Well, the way that I understand it, or what I think about it, and this is my opinion, I don't really have proof, but they needed to transition. Look, it was always my opinion, 2008, that's when the system actually died. And then they put it on life support to get ready to create the new system that they were going to transition us into. And that is, that's cryptocurrencies. Recently we had the IMF come out with a paper saying private crypto's bad, government crypto's good, central bank crypto's good. But I think that it was about getting people into position to think how convenient it is,
and just
how
briefly,
normal it is.
And very, very briefly, then, do you agree that that is a sort of precursor to the universal basic income, where everyone is dependent on the state? Just yes or no? Yes? Okay, fine. David?
100% yes.
Understood. David, final question then for you and for the programme. You've talked about people fighting back to prevent a cashless society from happening, otherwise we'll be doomed. What do you mean by the fight back?
Just to use cash in whenever you can. And there's areas that will not take cash in the U.S. And you could go in and just not argue with them. Just be polite, but just state to, let's say, a barista in a coffee shop that shop doesn't take cash. and just state that the Constitution has authority over any policy of any business, and that this instrument, you can read it to them, is good for all debts, private and public and private, and just lay it on the line. So what you've done in a calm manner is you've taught not only the person you're talking to, but probably anyone that's within earshot. But it's a simple way and a peaceful way to just perhaps wake up more people that we want to have control of our money. Money is power. If the banks have all the money or all control of the money, they've got all the power. If we have money that's sound money, then we have the power. That's really the basics.
David Morgan, Patrick Boyle, and Lynette Zang, thank you all very much for your contributions today. Really appreciate it, and thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode again or any of our previous episodes, go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.